Hey, how you doing? Hi, TJ.
Hi, Saf.
We missed you last week, TJ. We really did. But
Oh,
Jeremy,
thank you.
Jeremy did a great job, and you guys shared the same thoughts and have worked together, of course. So it was like from home to home, but it was lovely. But you were definitely missed. I
Oh,
must.
thank you. Yeah, I watched your interview. It was incredible. I love
Yeah,
that you both discovered about your adoption, and the conversation about trauma was incredible.
it was great. And but welcome back, of course, as
Thank
always.
you.
Hi guys, this is Universal Recovery with myself and TJ Woodward. Show that we have every Tuesday, and when TJ's not here, as you've just heard, Jeremy tries to fill in, and the show must go on as we speak. And we did speak about trauma last week, which was great, and I hope you guys got value from what we were talking about, and thank you for all your responses, and thank you for all your comments, and we always welcome them every week. But so where were you, TJ? Because you had an exciting. Was it a whole week you were away from California?
You know, it's interesting. The East Coast of the United States, you can go to a lot of states in a short period of time. So I actually was in 5 states and Washington, D.C. in the span of 6 days. 4 days of training, conscious recovery at treatment programs, and then 1 day of rest in Philly. So it was great. There was a winter storm. So, in California, I've missed snow, and I also am extremely grateful that I get to leave the snow. I went from snow in Philadelphia to walking on the beach the next evening. So, life is interesting.
Yeah, there's not many places you can do that, but that's
Right.
amazing. So you were going to different treatment facilities, different rehab centers, and introducing conscious recovery or training the staff. What did it actually all entail?
Yeah, so conscious recovery certified programs, it's a growing number of programs who have become certified in our model, and I go in and do a day and a half of training with the staff on the philosophies and really the experience of what conscious recovery is, and then train them on the curriculum. And it was a huge honor because they were the first two programs, New Life and Pinelands, one in New Jersey and the other one in Maryland. And they are the first two treatment programs outside of California to become certified. I'll be in Texas next week with Jeremy at New Hope Ranch. That'll be the third program certified outside of California. So we're grateful that the message is growing and spreading. And what I've experienced is counselors, therapists, clinicians are just hungry for a new approach. And we had some tears. We had some incredible experiences. So I love what I'm doing, and taking it on the road and traveling all around the country and hopefully the UK soon.
Oh, fingers crossed, and I hope to be some part of that. And
Yes.
I'll try and honor this beautiful program that you've created. So when you were there, not only were you, I guess, training the staff, did you actually have interaction with the people in the centers who were in rehab or in detox?
I did not, especially during COVID. We want to keep it really safe for everyone. So I didn't interact with any of the clients. It was just working with staff. The second program, I think it was 34 people in the room. So it was quite a day of exploring really this new way of looking at addiction. And they were so incredibly receptive.
Brilliant. Well, we got a few highs. Here we go. Angel says hi. Hi, Angel, as always. Jed, welcome, Jed. I think it's the first time TJ can actually see what you look like, because I've been saying your messages, but he's saying hi, gentlemen. Angel says hi. And Angel, because she just heard that you were on the East Coast, she said, I pray for all that have it difficult in the cold now.
Yes. Yeah. I'm going to Texas next week. And last week they were hit really hard. And as you may know, a lot of people lost power. A lot of people didn't have water. They're back. I think everything's getting back to some sense of normalcy because it's in the 70s there this week. So they're thawing out.
Wow. Hi, Judy. Welcome to our show, Universal Recovery. Good to have you. Thank you for keep the messages coming, guys. Well, you know what? I mean, myself and TJ, we're talking off air. Well, I'll tell you the reason why. One of my clients who doesn't have Facebook, and she watches our show on YouTube, which we don't get any questions or any queries to us via the YouTube link, only through Facebook, which is great. So we never get to answer any questions, and obviously I speak to her in my sessions. But today, and she absolutely loves you, TJ. By the way,
Thank you.
I said to her, look, well, what would you like myself and TJ to speak about today? And in conscious recovery, you have a section where you talk about where the client lists all different traumatic events. No, so all a list of, first they give a definition of what they believe trauma is.
Right.
Then they list all events that they think which are traumatic, and then I believe you ask them to circle which is prevalent to that they've experienced. So I did a bit of work with that, and now I've asked her the question to basically talk about one of them in particular, and she's talking about different events of her dysfunctional family. So I asked her, what would you like myself and TJ to talk about? She said, why don't you talk a bit about dysfunctional families and their relation to addiction? But which I think is great. Before we get into that, just want to say hi again. Angel's saying in Norway we have it cold too. I didn't know you were in Norway, Angel. Good to know. And also we've got Matt. Hi, Matt. Welcome to Universal Recovery, sir. So before we go into the dysfunctional family and how it's related to addiction, because it very well is, can you briefly tell us about these 3 steps of why you would ask someone to write a definition of trauma, then why would you ask them to write all traumatic events and then circle them? What was the thinking behind that when you developed and created conscious recovery?
Well, one of the things I have noticed or observed or experienced in working with clients, a lot of times clients will want me or want the person that's the professional to define things for them. And I understand why that is. But with conscious recovery, we're really looking at really all of it in a very different way. And that is, what are the answers within you? And how do we create a space to access those inner answers and those inner questions as well? So I start with, what is your definition of trauma? Because it's going to be much more powerful for us to create our own definition. With trauma, and I know we've talked about this, and you and Jeremy did such a great job talking about it. We don't really want to compare our trauma to someone else's. And that's why I'm not a huge fan of the big T, little t trauma framework, because it's really easy to say, oh, well, mine's a little t trauma, so it's less significant. And obviously, there are things that are traumatic that any of us would consider to be traumatic. Loss of a parent, being in a car accident, an illness, all of that, of course, is traumatic. And when we create our own definition of trauma and spend some time listing all the different things that could be traumatic, we start to recognize that it's a much broader umbrella than we might have realized. And, Saf, you and I have talked about this. Something that might be completely insignificant for one person can be a life-changing moment for another. I've had some of those experiences, and certainly working with clients. So we start with that so that they can really look within, ask themselves, what does trauma mean to me? Not what a dictionary would say. Do we still have dictionaries? Probably online, right? Or what a professional would say, but what does it mean to me? And I think
we have Google. We have Google, TJ.
That's right.
What's a dictionary? I don't know. I heard that sometime. Yeah. So, okay, great. So, big T, little t. You're right. It's what's personal to us. So we are. And is there a right or wrong answer?
Of course not. It's really what does it mean to me? And again, because we don't want people to really to compare their trauma to someone else's. And I already love what Judy's saying, because that's exactly right. It goes back generations, and we're learning more about generational trauma and how that affects us, and how it actually changes our physiology, that it actually changes our DNA and our brains. And we have this trauma that gets passed down from generation to generation. And one thing I'll say about dysfunctional families is I like to look at it a little bit differently with conscious recovery. Not so much dysfunctional, but what were the strategies that people developed to try to manage? And some of those strategies can be really harmful to children, and it gets passed down, right? And as Angel's saying, the wounds that get passed down from generation to generation are incredibly powerful in the way they shape what we call reality.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's in conscious recovery in particular, it's important to only we don't force it with the clients, but we talk about it, and if they want to explore it, it's quite important to look at unresolved trauma.
Yes. Yeah, and you know, it's interesting. I one of the things I did on my 6-hour plane flight back and forth to the East Coast was I'm actually revising the workbook and adding more content. So coming soon, there's going to be 3 chapters or 3 sections that actually precede the trauma. This came to me because I realized that diving into trauma without spending at least some time recognizing that place within ourselves that is unharmable, right? And that's something that's really different with conscious recovery, is we're identifying that underneath all addictive behavior is an essential self that's whole and perfect. So I'm spending some time inviting people who are working through the workbook to first spend some time recognizing that. And then when we get to the trauma, we have the ability to start working with it, because it might not seem so daunting or so scary. And as you said, conscious recovery isn't trying to dig in and try to, you know, get someone to explore their trauma in a forceful way, but more of a way of inviting the possibility. You know, has your unresolved trauma led at least in some way to your addiction? Is it trapped in your body in some way? And has it created the way that you experience the world? And that's really the work that we would like to explore with conscious recovery.
Definitely. Judy says a very valid point here, and I hope I've got this right, Judy, when you say this, and maybe TJ might understand it the same as I or differently. She says, anger. My dad would say, don't get sad, get mad. That's not the advice that I would give my children. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but I think it's okay to show emotions. And if you, I mean, this is maybe I've got this all wrong, but am I thinking right that Judy's saying that it wasn't about letting your emotion? I don't know. What do you get from that, TJ? Before
yeah, I mean, it sounds like Judy received a message from her dad that it's not okay to be sad, but it is okay to be mad or to be angry, right? And so we have all these paradigms that are passed down, and I like to look at it as a brilliant strategy. So my guess is, Judy, your dad at some point managed his sadness by getting angry, and it seemed to work on some level for him. What most of us recognize now is that if we don't address the full gamut of our emotions, and we use something to try to avoid them, that's not necessarily healing what is wanting to be healed. And then we pass it on to our children. Right? Because like I think about my dad and his generation, men were taught not to feel. I mean, it was okay. You could get angry. Men could get angry, but you know, it was considered a weakness in my dad's generation to say, oh, I feel sad right now. I mean, it just didn't happen. Right. So that got passed down to me. And that was something that, you know, gender roles are changing. I'm personally really grateful for that, because we're not one-dimensional beings. And I don't, you know, subscribe to that we're fundamentally different because the gender we're born with, but that all of us are taught from a really early age how to manage emotions. And if I'm taught, so Judy, if you were taught that it's not okay to be sad, but it's okay to get mad, you know, then we start to look at what did that create? What were the decisions you made about yourself and the world? And then start to unpack that and look at, because I don't like to look at it as good or bad or right or wrong or even necessarily functional or dysfunctional, but ask the question, how is it serving me? How is it not? And what do I truly desire? And how do I start to shift that?
It's this is a slightly different topic than we wanted to speak about, dysfunctional families. But I did a show recently, Men's Talk on Sky TV that I do every on Britain, and the actual topic that day, or we were talking, was about gender norms. And it was very interesting. And I came up with a point of view, and I'm pretty sure you'll agree with that, is that there's too many people out there that treat young boys and young girls, young sons and young daughters differently. Okay, you get a father there that who the young girl gets a doll or a little teddy bear, and the boy gets a little toy gun or something. You know what? I've been thinking about this and looking at it in my own life, and maybe I was guilty of doing that in some way. And then I realized, you know what? Why can't we give our kids, our young boys, a doll or something? Because I'd rather they grow up to be nurturing as opposed to being a serial killer, for example.
Yeah. Yeah. And, this is a huge topic. And I firmly believe, and it's been my experience, and, Saf, we've talked about this a lot. We come in, at least in my estimation or my experience, pretty much as blank canvases. And in my language, and I would say we come in as whole and perfect spiritual beings. And then we start to get programmed, and gender programs are so incredibly deep. It runs really deep because a lot of it is tied to shame. Now, again, we're seeing gender roles just changing dramatically. I sometimes say gender is so 20th century because, the kids these days, they're getting that it's time for a radical shift, and this is something that there are a lot of opinions about, good, bad, right, wrong. What I want to offer is that, we are not, we are multidimensional beings. And as Saf said, what would it be like if we started teaching our people to find the answers within themselves and become more loving and more nurturing? And we're seeing this, right? I look at the men in my generation and then the generation after me, and, it's different now. Men have been given permission to have their feelings, and women have been given more permission to be strong. And, that's the flip side of that. And again, we're talking about, for the most part, in the past, because depending on your age, you got programmed by the gender norms and the societal norms. We could talk about this for hours. And what I want to say is that it's starting to shift where more and more of us we're being given permission to recognize that we have all of it within us, not just this one piece because of our gender.
Yeah. We've got so many questions. I don't know where to start. We'll go through them quickly, guys, because obviously otherwise the show will just go on answering all these questions. But I'd like to acknowledge some, if I may. Angel says, free ancestors from attachments and being that makes us do stuff we really don't want to.
Right.
Thank you for that. Jed, how much? Okay, now, the reason why I'm asking that is because this is interesting. And I don't know if Judy says, she relapsed after 6 years, then she managed to get to 5 years twice before. The question you have to ask yourself, Judy, is what happens in that 5th or 6th year? What are you doing that keeps you abstinent for 5 to 6 years? And then what is it a common thing that in that 5th or 6th year? Is there a commonality because of the relapse? I think that's an important question to, I guess, firstly see if it's the same sort of thing, if it's a pattern of some sort, and then if we could look at that, then we could probably answer that better for you. Is that right, TJ? Find out if it's a regular thing, or it's the same thing that makes one relapse after a certain period of time.
Yeah, and I think there's two different directions to take the conversation. As Saf is saying, look at the patterns, and that is a lot on the behavioral side of it, and you could even say the symptom side, like what is it that happens at 5 years? There's some information there that could be really valuable, and in my experience, if we don't do the deeper healing, and that's for all of us, right? There's no finish line here. As I continue to heal, and we're talking about, families and generational trauma today. So if I'm healing that trauma, my guess is that at 5 or 6 years, there's not going to be that same impulse, because I actually think so many of the addiction models focus on symptoms and behaviors. And really, conscious recovery, and in my journey, we invite people to get down and heal some of the deeper trauma, and then those patterns start to work themselves out. In other words, we unplug from the pattern and we plug into what's the deeper healing here. I know for myself, there have been some benchmarks in my recovery. I've shared this before, but at 2 years, I was close to suicidal at 2 years sober because I hadn't addressed the trauma. And I was told not to address the trauma. Just don't drink. That's all you need to do. And then at 5 years, and this is just for me, Judy, I don't know if you relate to this, but there was a deepening that was asked of me at 5 years. And maybe it could be said as like, is this all there is? It was one of my first is this all there is moments, because, you know, it was okay, I've been sober now 5 years. This has become kind of my normal life. But then I started looking at what is the deeper meaning and purpose of my life. And I remember someone telling me, and then I thought, well, is this just superstition? But something significant happens at like 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, these benchmarks, we are invited to go deeper. And so I would say even more important than focusing on what happens at 5 years, in addition to that, it's what's happening right now and what is wanting to heal so that we can interrupt some of these patterns.
Thank you. Jed, and again, this is, I think he's asked this question off the back of Judy's. How much time do you give a recovering addict to have a clear enough thought process to be able to comprehend him or herself, to be able to help him or herself?
Yeah, well, I love this because I'm gonna answer it through experience. I think the old paradigm, at least when I got sober in 1986, was kind of like, you don't need to think about any of this. You don't need to address any of this. Just stop drinking. If you didn't drink today, you had a successful day. And there was a little bit of a, you know, your best thinking got you here. So, you know, sit down, shut up, let us tell you what to do. I mean, it wasn't a little bit, actually. That's what people were telling me. Yes, so that, and I think the deeper, or the, you know, maybe more important way to perceive this or to talk about it is that I don't think healing really comes through thinking, right? So even though my mind may take some time to clear when I'm recovering from an addiction, if I have a physical detox, but spiritually, I think we can start healing from day one. And that's what I'm really wanting to do with conscious recovery, because I don't want everyone to have to go 2 years without dealing with the trauma, and they've taken away the drugs or the alcohol, and that was the solution, and they're left with all of this unresolved trauma and disconnection. So we're intending to create a paradigm where people can start working on it on day one, even as the mind might take some time to clear. And I hope I'm answering what you're asking, Jed.
I think you are, but the challenge there for me is, or the question is what if the client, especially early in recovery, what if the client is not ready to relive some of the experiences? Because in a sense, you would be reliving it because you're talking about it in some cases, because it's unresolved. Now, for it to be resolved, you have to talk about it, right? So what if the client, especially in early recovery, but any time in recovery, I guess, is not willing to talk about it, even though you and I know that if we did talk about it, it would help their recovery tenfold.
Yeah, well, I think there's a bit of a framework or a paradigm that has been created where we might think someone's really fragile in the beginning of their recovery, so we shouldn't address this. And there's a lot of truth to that, obviously. But then there's a large percentage of people that I've worked with that they're really just, they're needing to address the trauma. It's the trauma that's creating the relapse after relapse. And then we're, I think, maybe afraid to address it because they might not believe they have the ability to do so. And so that's why conscious recovery focuses first on really connecting with that essential self within each of us, because it becomes much less scary to look at the trauma. If I believe I am my trauma, it becomes really, really scary to look. And we don't necessarily have to go back and re-experience the trauma. I think trauma healing is more about really cultivating a relationship with a part of ourselves that could be called the nervous system or the spiritual self, where we can have the ability to be present with ourselves more, because addiction is running from the present. It's running from the experience of now. It's running from emotions. So it's not necessarily about let's go back and re-experience the trauma. It's first, let's talk about how we cultivate a relationship with ourselves where it becomes safe. And that's why in conscious recovery, the first step in recovery for conscious recovery is creating safety, mostly internal safety. And the way I'll say it simply is, what if we can feel more and experience more than we may have believed, because we've been in the addictive pattern of trying to run from the emotion. So being present with it is so important.
I think you're totally right, and I'm also a strong believer, without coming across too militant or too regimental with the client, is that if you really want to make a change, if you're really serious about aiming towards abstinence or having this new way of life or transforming from this, you have to be willing and wanting to actually make the change. And if it means looking at certain things that you might find uncomfortable, never forced to do it, but if you really want to make a change, sometimes you've got to do what you've got to do to get through this. And again, I don't mean to say that from a militant point of view or from a point that you've got to do it, otherwise we're not going to help you. But it's something that, you know what, if you're really ready, forget about rock bottom, because when I came to recovery, it wasn't about rock bottom. I was just done. Jeremy,
Yes.
Jeremy, I call you Jeremy. TJ,
That's good.
I've still got Jeremy on my mind. I was just done, TJ. Totally done. And I was prepared to do anything. Help me.
Mm-hmm.
You want to look at my trauma? Let's look for it if it's going to help me.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, the way I like to frame it, and it kind of ties into what Angel is saying, and I love, of course, what she's saying, and that is, if we look at patterns without judgment, because point to all of this. So the reason that I'm saying what Angel is saying and what you're saying ties in together is, I think there's always a part of me that is willing and a part of me that wants to run away, right? Especially in early recovery. And so just to normalize that, let's look at that without judgment. And then we can start focusing on what part of you does want to change, what part of you does recognize you can look at this. And I agree with Angel wholeheartedly. If I look at my patterns with judgment, I actually keep them, it solidifies them, it keeps them, we stay stuck in it. Anytime I go into judgment of myself or others, it causes constriction instead of more openness. So if I can start to look exactly what Angel's saying, let's look at whether or not they're serving me, in what ways they are, in what ways they aren't, especially when we're looking at what gets passed down in our family and the generational trauma. You know, something that has been true for me is, you know, my mother, and as much as I love my mother and I just love her dearly, there were some messages that came from her parents and their parents and their parents, that one of the messages was, there's not enough. I mean, I heard that every day. We can't afford it. There's not enough. And I looked around and I thought, we have a 4-bedroom house and 2 cars. Why do I feel like we're poor, right? It was this constantly, there's not enough. And that was a deep program. And I struggled with money for, gosh, at least 20 years of my adult life, because I wasn't aware that that core belief was really dictating just about everything in my life, because my solution to it was I tried to get more, right, in an addictive way. And it wasn't until I recognized I was trying to heal that deep wound of a deep belief that, you know, I didn't deserve. So I think it's important to look at it without judgment, as Angel said.
Definitely. Judy goes on to say, I felt growing up I lived in a hostile world. Only the past years I know how to handle it. Anger. Yeah. And she carries on saying, I couldn't handle people smiling at me. And she says, lol. It never felt good. Strange but true. And well, I guess that's down to the bring up, isn't it? That's what you're used to. That's what the society was with us, the environment that we were brought up in, and then suddenly, bang, that's what happens. I've got a question for Mr. Steve Webber, and I think this I think only you could probably. Oh God, where's he gone? You could probably just answer. They've got so many questions today.
Well, while you're looking for that, I'll address what Judy's saying, because that's it's so fundamental in conscious recovery. Once I have these core decisions about myself, and they're really not decisions, they are, but they get trapped in our unconscious or subconscious, and we literally believe that's what we deserve. And it's not usually a conscious thought, it's usually an unconscious way of being with the world. So if I believe that there's something fundamentally wrong with me and someone says something kind to me, I literally repel from it. That was my experience. My first spiritual teacher, Mary Helen, who I talk about a lot, she would say, "Darling, you're so precious." And I would literally feel my body would have a reaction to it. I would respond with, that can't be true, right? It wasn't so much a thought, but an experience I was having. So as we start to shift that, then we can start to open up to these different ways of seeing ourselves in the world.
And it's not only us having that belief that there's something fundamentally wrong with us. We also end up thinking there's something fundamentally wrong with the world.
Absolutely.
So it's just us and the world, right?
Yeah, but only 100% of the time that I'm projecting. So exactly. if I believe I'm broken, I'm going to see brokenness in the world everywhere.
Yeah. I'm going to start with this question, and then I'm sure I keep calling you Jeremy, TJ.
It's okay.
I'm not hinting anything. Steve, our very own co-creator, Steve Weber, American Gumption. Please watch his show every day. He says, does conscious recovery believe all addictions have trauma at its core, or is it possible that addictions are just habits that spiraled out of control, or are the origins irrelevant? And I'm going to let TJ answer that. But in my experience, as Gabor says, it's not why the addiction, what's why the pain. And I don't like calling it addiction anymore. I call it bonding. It's, again, in my experience, every client that I've worked with within addiction, whether it's been in the prison service, whether it's been in the community, whether it's been in rehab centers, every single one of them have suffered or experienced some kind of trauma. Not to say that everyone who I know who has experienced trauma overindulges in addiction of some kind. But all I can say that in my experience, every client, every person that I've had any dealing with regarding addictions have experienced or suffered some kind of trauma. TJ.
Yes. Well, I love all your questions, Steve. And I'll start with, I believe every human being has experienced trauma at this point in the evolution of human consciousness, because we all get programmed to believe that we're somehow not enough, or that the world is not safe in some way. So one is kind of normalizing the experience of trauma. And then, we need to look at what is addiction. I think looking backward, the belief was addiction is a disease. And if you have the disease, you have addictive tendencies. And that's sort of like it, period. And I have worked in addiction treatment for over a decade, and I have met people, absolutely, that they have addictions that are habits that have spiraled out of control. Absolutely, people have done that. What I see as the fundamental difference in what might cross the line of addiction is this trauma piece, because so to answer it concisely, does conscious recovery believe all addictions have trauma at its core? Essentially, the answer is yes. Is it possible that addictions are just habits that have spiraled out of control? Absolutely could be. Are the origins irrelevant? No, I believe the origins are extremely important, not from a place of if I can figure out why I can eradicate it, but to look at what created the sense of brokenness or the sense of being disconnected with my true nature, and then this search outside of ourselves for relief. So I think, the paradigm of what we call addiction is drugs and alcohol. But I mean, I can speak for Americans in the United States. I think we're highly addicted. We're a highly addicted culture. Not everyone is drugs and alcohol. The way we eat, people come from Europe and get a meal delivered to them, and they say, "Is this for the whole table?" No, this is for one person in the United States, right?
I thought it was just the East Coast. Is it happening in the West Coast as well?
Oh, absolutely. And addicted to shopping, addicted to drama, addicted to the news, addicted to reality TV. I mean, we can go on and on.
Addicted to the
So
phone?
to the phone. And so we're not looking at it as it's something so bad. We're looking at it as the strategy that we're using because of the unresolved trauma. And then to have a broader definition of trauma. And I recognize that there are it's multifactorial. There are a lot of different reasons someone might find themselves in an addictive pattern. For me, the people that have crossed the line where the addiction has become really detrimental in their life, almost always, if not always, there's some degree of unresolved trauma that is at least in some way driving it.
And again, it's important that we say that, we want to move away from big T, little t trauma.
Yeah.
Trauma can be anything. To someone else, it might be small, but if it's big to you, or if it's personal to you, it's personal to you. So trauma can be absolutely anything. I've just very quickly recreate your majesty. I think that's like be masters of your destiny and not victims of your past. Judy says a couple of really good points, and she goes, I saw myself, 3 of me in a dream. Only one spoke. I touched her cheek because I saw a tear. She smiled and said, of course, I am real. I believe I met myself in another dimension.
Yeah, and that's the deeper healing for me, is that inner child healing and looking at the core fundamental decisions and experiences that we made and that we had as a little person really inform how we experience the world. Addiction is just a brilliant strategy to try to feel whole again, quite frankly. We're all seeking, and that's why I love, Saf, that you talk about it through the lens of a connection, right? We're all trying to connect. And when I was out of alignment with myself, because the truth is I abandoned myself at a very, very young age because it was too scary to stay present. So I built a wall and I checked out. And when I found drugs and alcohol, it was like, I feel whole again. Now, obviously, it didn't keep working that way, or we wouldn't be here having this conversation. But I was really trying to heal and trying to connect in all of my behavior, including my addictions, plural. And healing and making a connection with our younger self, I think, is the really important step in actually starting to heal the addiction instead of just treat it.
Thank you, TJ. Judy, I'm going to ask you, please, if you could give a message. You said you stopped going to meetings. I'm assuming you're talking about the fellowship meetings, the 12-step meetings. Please let us know why you stopped going, because it'd be interesting to find out. And if we don't have time to talk about it today, please join us next week. Clear cells and balance the mind. Thank you. Delete the DNA.
Yeah.
Valuable behavioral advice for families. That's my wife, TJ.
Oh, wonderful. Hi.
Hi. Thank you for that. Elizabeth, Beth, how you doing, Beth? Beth is someone I know very well in the UK. She says hello. Hi, Beth. Welcome to Universal Recovery. So I'm just going through these quickly so we can keep on. Me too. Some years ago, I'm glad I was helped back. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I resonate with what you shared. I think that's towards you, TJ.
Well, thank you. And I'd love to touch on something, and now I don't remember who said it, but we're now in this unbelievable time of advancement, spiritual advancement, technological advancement, scientific advancement, and we're starting to recognize what I innately have known, and so many other people have been saying. And that is, our DNA is not as solid as we once believed. Our brain chemistry is not as solid as we once believed. We actually create it, and it gets changed over generations, right? So in other words, if trauma can change my DNA, then I can actually change it as well. And I can start to have an impact on what we once believed was so solid. So we used to believe, well, it's just something that is, we're talking about deleting DNA. So we used to say, well, it's just how I am. It's who I am. I came in this way. I have this DNA, and it's almost like I don't have a choice. But we're starting to recognize through neuroplasticity plasticity in the brain that are habits. So they're starting with habits, which I think is an entry point. Starting with habits, habits create new neural pathways. But for me, it's much deeper than that. It's really the core frequency that we're tuning into, and that starts to change. And, even I say even Western medicine is starting to realize they're starting with our attitudes affect our physical health. But, Seth, we know it's actually much deeper than that. That vibration. Dr. Joe Dispenza is one person, really, exploring this, as many of us are, that core frequency actually affects every aspect of our being, including changing our neural pathways and even our DNA, especially generational.
Thank you. We've got so many questions here. We haven't got enough time. But hi, Elaine. I don't believe I've heard from you before. We haven't heard. So hi, Elaine. Welcome to Universal Recovery. We've got so many questions here, and I guess I'm probably going to finish on Jed as the last one. If we haven't answered your questions, please either send myself or TJ an email, and we'll be happy to speak to you further. My email address is on my website. TJ's, I'm sure, is on his website. My info at safbuxy.com. If there's anything that we can't answer, we do apologize. Always, or ask me next week. But Jed is asking something related to conscious recovery. So I thought let's ask that question. This is what he says. So he says, how much does conscious recovery get into the simple habits of raising your hand to your mouth 1,000 times with your beer as a mind to muscle connection?
Well, with conscious recovery, quite frankly, we don't address it as much, because with conscious recovery, we're recognizing that because you're speaking of a habit, right? Which of course is a very real thing. The neural pathways, I do things over and over and over again, and that gets created as a deeply ingrained habit. Most of us don't think about how we brush our teeth. We just pick up the toothbrush and brush it. And we're not consciously aware of what we're doing. Now, if we change hands and try the other brush, that's information, because it's so jarring to us. So I think a huge part of recovery in the beginning, especially, is habit change. Conscious recovery doesn't dive too deeply into it, because the conversation that we're having, again, conscious recovery is not intended to be the one answer that covers everything. It's a very specific approach that helps someone both connect with themselves spiritually and also heal the underlying issues. So I think what you're speaking to is important, and especially in the beginning, and that's why I think community is so important. Mentorship is so important. And then those habits. I know for myself, I went to like 10 support group meetings a week in the beginning, because I needed to create those new neural pathways. Now, I didn't know that's what I was doing. I was just going because I was so, I felt so broken, and that was a place I was feeling loved and feeling helped.
Brilliant. I mean, there's so many questions. We really haven't got time. I'm not sure if there's any advice for young mother dealing with the father struck. Any advice for a young mother dealing with the father struggling with addiction, even after his attending many rehabs? Is that young mother who's married to, or is it? I don't know if it's the husband or the father of the young mother, but either way, it doesn't matter who it is. That's just semantics, isn't it? Any who's struggling with addiction, even after attending many rehabs. I can answer that very, very quickly, if I may.
Sure.
It's try everything. Look at other modalities. Look at conscious recovery. Look at 12-step meetings. Look at support groups. See if you utilized everything. I mean, we live in a wonderful world where there's so many services available. Be around like-minded people. Go to professionals like myself and TJ, and there's so many out there as well. Try everything. There's obviously something not working in rehabs. I think it probably is working whilst he is in rehab, but when he comes out to the real world, something obviously happens, or he goes back to old habits. So there's a lot of things you can look at. So I'm just running through this very quickly. TJ, there's so many questions. Leanne, hi Leanne, just say hi to you. Judy, I allowed someone in my life who didn't like me going to the meetings. This is why she left. Okay. This person is not in my life anymore, and I just thought I was a broken woman, not an alcoholic. If meetings helped you, Judy, go again. If you got value out of it. But obviously try conscious recovery, try other modalities. Conscious recovery, and TJ says it time and time again, we're not here to disregard other modalities. We're not here to be instead of, we're here to be in addition to. So please try us, and please try, there's things out there. So more or less the same answer for the other person. Elaine saying she's loved you so much, my lovely sister. And we'll finish off with Steve. And he says, thanks both for your brilliant answers. I definitely had my own trauma. The concept of addictive behavior being a physical condition never resonated. I prefer to see my recovery today as an unhealthy past habit. Thank you very much, Steve, for everything. Thank you very much, everyone. Time has just flown by, and we didn't even get to talk about dysfunctional families. So my client's not going to be too happy, but we'll try and do that next time round. But any last words, TJ, for today?
Just thank you, everyone. I love the questions, and Saf, maybe we can figure out a way to do a longer show at some point where we just answer questions, because I love it, and I love being in the exploration. And just thank you, everyone, for joining us ongoing. And I'm so incredibly grateful, because my life's purpose, as long as I'm blessed to be here, is to be in these conversations and to offer some ways for people to really heal and return to their wholeness.
Thank you, TJ. And you know what, maybe we should extend it to an hour. We always end up going 50, 55 anyway, but maybe we should extend it to an hour. And then maybe what I have, I can pull back or do another day, and maybe we could have an hour. Myself and TJ will speak about it, and especially when there's more and more people watching us, and we're very grateful for that. Thanks, Judy, your input today, and of course Angel, Leanne, and Jed, and Steve. Thank you very much. And Judy, I hope you will come back. I hope you have found some value. I mean, she says, sounds wonderful, guys. It's really helped. So we're happy to hear that. And thank you as well. Thank you, guys. This has been another week of Universal Recovery. Again, as always, watch me on Thursday, live at 8 p.m. Inspirational people, inspirational stories. I don't know who my guest is this Thursday, but keep tuned. And every Monday night on Sky TV, channel 191 in the UK, Sky Showcase, I'm hosting Men's Talk at 9:30 p.m. This has been Universal Recovery, Spirituality Gone Wild. I'm Saf, and this is TJ, and we hope you have a great week. And if there's any questions that we haven't answered, please, we apologize, and we'll try and get them answered either on the chat or send us an email, and we'll be happy to answer it. So God bless and have a great week. Bye, TJ.
Thank you, everyone.